after a 3-14 start, the 76ers have appeared to turn it around, going 9-12 since with statement wins over Boston and San Antonio. But will they climb back into the playoff race, and what has led to their recent success? Let me show you. First of all, the horrific start to the season had a lot to do with not having their key guys on the floor, as when you look at the season as a whole, Philadelphia have only started and ended a game with their big three just 4 times out of a possible 29 games. And the reason I say started and ended is because there's been plenty of games where one of them either got hurt midway through the game, or like the Spurs game where Embiid got ejected. So now that they've been able to string together a couple of games where they've all been available, we saw them pick up 2 good wins. First being the most impressive, which was a Christmas Day win against the Boston Celtics, and the second coming against Utah. To beat the reigning champs in their building on prime time is no joke. And the way the 76ers played, it didn't appear as if that this is just a one-off, as some of their success in that game could definitely be repeated. For example, everything that had to do with Embiid being in a pick and roll looked great. I thought for the most part their rotations out to the shooters of Boston were good, but the main thing that stood out to me was what Tyrese Maxey said during one of the timeouts.
Ben likes to take and make a lot of three-pointers. What's the key to running them off the line?
You got to guard one-on-one, guard your yard. I mean, they're extremely talented one-on-one level players. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Peyton Pritchard, I can go on and name them. But you got to guard your yard and make them take tough twos.
Guard your yard was the message sent to the team, led by Maxey, who was up pressuring the Celtics guards, as the Sixers for the most part on defense stayed home on their guys, electing to play Boston one-on-one. I've long thought that this is the way to beat the Celtics because of a couple of reasons. First being it doesn't allow them to get your defense into rotation because you're not sending doubles. And 2 is how it tricks them into playing isolation basketball, which is something they're not as effective at. By staying home and not sending the double team, Boston's offense isn't allowed to flow in the half court as it would usually. The Celtics offense in the half court is basically predicated on forcing a double and then getting the ball to the open man wherever he may be, with these shots usually coming from deep. But if you're not going to send the double, Boston don't have anyone to swing the ball to and are then forced into a much less efficient isolation. Although Tatum has improved his isolation game this year compared to last, the same cannot be said for Jaylen Brown or the other Celtics players. So with this being a clear weakness, the 76ers made an effort to guard their yard, forcing Boston to have to play more isolation in the half court, which kept them in check. But it wasn't just what the Sixers did defensively that won them this game, as their offense also had a lot to do with that. Tyrese Maxey was the best player in this game, and has been Philly's best player on the season, as he put up 33 points, 12 assists, and 3 steals, shooting 12 of 23 from the floor, leading the way offensively. All game long, the Celtics had no answer to slowing him down, as he was either putting the ball in the bucket or finding the open man. The reason why he's such a tough guard is because of how incredibly quick he is with the ball in his hands. Some guys in the league are fast, but Maxey's on a whole nother level, as usually Boston like to pressure opposing guards before half court, but they weren't able to do this to Maxey, which allowed the Sixers to get into their offensive sets quicker than most teams, which then allowed for better looks. What also helped Philadelphia is how Boston made it a statement to leave Caleb Martin open from deep, and they ultimately paid the price, as he made 7 of 9 from downtown, and these weren't just open looks, they were absolutely wide open looks. Time and time again, the Celtics kept leaving him open, and he kept making them pay. As usually when you're leaving a guy open like this and he makes a couple of shots, you give him the benefit of the doubt and guard him next time. But the Celtics never did this, as they continued to leave him open and he continued to make them pay. Boston looked at the scouting report and saw his bad 3-point effectiveness of just 30% on 0.8 attempts per game and said, let's leave this guy open. However, they should have known more than anyone that Caleb Martin isn't a non-shooter, as he's done this to them before. In fact, in that playoff series only 2 seasons ago, where the 8-seeded Heat beat the Celtics in 7 games, he averaged 19.3 points per game on 49% shooting from deep. This was definitely an arrogant coaching move on the part of the Boston Celtics, and they ultimately paid for it in this game. But these are still not the only things that went in Philly's favor, as I thought Embiid looked great in this game despite a lesser stat line of 27 points and 9 rebounds. Even after sustaining an ankle injury in the warm-up, he came out and looked great, getting up and down the floor with ease and making 4 out of his 5 threes. We saw it a bit, but the pick and roll between George and Embiid is one I want to look out for, as I believe this could be the key to further unlocking their offense. Nick Nurse was asked about the potential pick and roll connection between Paul George and Joel Embiid, and he basically said that because they haven't played any games together, they really don't have the data on how effective the action is yet. But in this game, the eye test looked pretty good, and it just makes sense. Both guys are great mid-range shooters who could both benefit greatly from getting a little bit of extra space in that mid-range area. Similar to what the Knicks are doing with Cat and Brunson, I believe this is a pick and roll combination that could prove deadly. This would still be the second pick and roll action on the team behind the Maxey Embiid pick and roll, but just like what Milwaukee have been developing with Giannis, being able to have Chris and Dame both run action with him, it makes them a very tough guard. But because of the fact they haven't really had much time together, it's still very early in the process of building any real chemistry, which is concerning given the fact that we're coming up on January already. On the season, Philadelphia have the 26th worst offensive rating in the NBA, only scoring 108.9 points per game on the season. And even over this recent winning streak, that rating is actually even worse, only scoring 108.8 points per game. Yes, that's only 0.1 points worse. However, you want to improve, not stay the same. It's ultimately been their defense that's won them games throughout this stretch, holding teams to just 106.6 points per night, which is good enough to rank them as the 4th best defense in the NBA. So even though the offense doesn't look good right now, having your defense being top 5 is a very good sign for this team, given the potential they have to build an above-average offensive system. This will especially be apparent when Paul George returns to form. On the season, his shooting splits are simply not to the level that we expect from him. PG really is the key to unlocking this team's offense, as if he gets back to the kind of production he gave the Clippers last year, where he had the most effective season of his career, boasting an effective field goal percentage of 57% for 22.6 points per game, I believe this would instantly change the outlook for Philly's offense, which would be a perfect complement to the defense. So their defense is a very positive sign, and I'm not overly concerned about the poor offense, but what I believe is still an issue for this team is what happens off the bench. They have had quality contributions from Yabusele, Andre Drummond, and Kelly Oubre, but outside of these guys, the roster is very old and unproductive. You've got veterans past their prime like Eric Gordon, Kyle Lowry, and Reggie Jackson, who are getting legitimate rotation minutes, and they're supposed to be Rookie of the Year. Jared McCain has tragically been ruled out for the rest of the season. This roster is now very top-heavy, which often doesn't bode well when it comes to the postseason, as you get forced into playing a very short rotation, leading to injuries and fatigue. And especially for this team, injuries and fatigue are real concerns, given the fact that they've got Paul George and Joel Embiid on the roster, two of the most injury-prone players in the recent seasons. But I do believe that in the coming weeks, they're going to quickly climb a relatively weak Eastern Conference. But if we're talking about them being healthy in the postseason, I feel like we're speaking about an alternate reality. I'm not even sure if I'd be willing to put $1 on them being healthy for an entire postseason run, as it doesn't even seem like it's a realistic possibility. There's no doubt that this team has an incredibly high ceiling, but we're not playing NBA 2K with the injury sliders turned off. Injuries can and will happen, and I just don't believe this team is deep enough to survive those times. Potentially packaging a couple of these guys together at the trade deadline for some better backup talent could be an option. However, the front office hasn't seen enough from this team to fully go all in yet. But what do you guys think? Are you still out on the Philadelphia 76ers, or do you believe that they have a legitimate chance to make it out of the Eastern Conference if everything goes right? Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments section below.